Do you know the fastest way to get your knife into action when an attacker strikes? In this video, Mike Janisch, founder of Martial Blade Concepts, breaks down the fundamentals of drawing your knife effectively. Plus, stick around to the end because we have a gun giveaway you can enter for free that ends soon. Now, let's play the video.
If you carry a folding knife as a defensive weapon, you need to be able to get that knife into action quickly. Folding knives are great, they're very convenient, but at the same time they involve more actions, more operations to be able to get them to the point to where they're open in your hand and ready to go. So one of the things you have to look at with a folding knife is specifically how you get the blade open. Now most knives these days, what you're going to find is they're clip carried, so they're right at the top of the pocket, very easy to draw, very accessible. And then what you'll have is some type of a thumb purchase. Now it could be a thumb stud, it could be a disc, it could be something else, but what it allows you to do is to use your thumb to manually open the blade and pivot it into the open position. Now under normal administrative use, just pulling the knife out and using it as a utility tool, that's not a problem. But when you're doing stuff under stress, the more fine motor skills, the more complex motor skills you have involved, the harder it becomes. And especially when you consider your hands might be sweating, you might have other stuff going on, you might even be wearing gloves. All those things are going to make things a lot more difficult to get your knife into action when you need it most. So the opening that I prefer doesn't involve using the traditional thumb opening this way. Instead, what you're doing is opening the blade by inertia. So when we look at inertia, what inertia basically is that an object that is at rest or an object that's in motion will continue to stay at rest or continue to stay in motion until it's acted on by some other force. That's basically the physics definition of what inertia is. In our case, what it means is I want to be able to accelerate the entire knife in a particular direction, essentially rotating it around its pivot pin, and then stop the handle so that the blade continues on. So what you're looking at is basically achieving that. The key to doing this is to remember that the blade is always going to pivot at the pivot pin. So what you'll see in a lot of cases, people trying to wrist flick knives open, if you see a motion of your arm where you're doing this, if you see that pivot pin traveling in an arc, what that means is that your wrist is the center of that motion. Or you'll see some people using very broad motions that originate at the elbow. Again, you've got this big, broad motion. It's not going to impart inertia to the blade very efficiently. Instead, what you want to think of, first of all, when you grip the knife, you're going to grip it so that your thumb is coming in perpendicular to the handle here, fingers also perpendicular, and notice that I'm gripping away from my palm. What this allows me to do is to rotate my hand very quickly. What I'm also doing is, you notice my elbow comes up, elbow comes down. It's almost like that stupid chicken dance that we've all done if you've gone to a wedding or something like that, where you're basically rotating the elbow up, and in the process, by going up and down, I keep that pivot pin at one point in space. So what you get when you do this quickly is the ability to transfer that inertia to the blade and get it to pop open. The beauty of this is that when we look at the full draw stroke, I look at drawing the knife, achieving my grip very quickly, and then opening the blade without having to index my thumb onto the blade. Now, there's a number of things as far as knife design that you have to bear in mind when it comes to learning this technique. First of all, it does take a lot of practice. It is something that you have to invest some time in. And it's also something, depending upon the lock of the knife. In this case, we have a Spyderco Yojimbo 2 with a compression lock knife, and the detent on this is essentially a ball bearing detent. Once you overcome that detent, the blade will open the rest of the way very easily. If we contrast that to something like a back lock knife, with a back lock, what you have is a strong self-close mechanism. So with the self-close, what you have is a spring that is in line with the plane of the blade, and it snaps that blade closed very quickly and very powerfully. What that means is you've got to work a little bit harder. But if you look at the details here, like on this particular knife, this is a saber ground knife. A saber ground knife has a much thicker, meatier blade, so there's more mass to the blade. The more mass you have in the blade, the easier it is to do this technique. What you also can look at, here's a very similar knife. This is also a Spyderco Delica 4, but in this case, what you have is a full flat ground Wharncliffe blade. With a full flat grind, what you've got is a much thinner grind, much less mass to the blade itself, and therefore much more of a challenge when it comes to opening the knife. You need a little bit more English, a little bit more action to be able to get that open. So when you're first learning, what you can actually do, again, very similar knife here. In this case, what you have is a hawkbill blade This is not only saber ground where it has lots of mass to it, the blade shape itself is also a little bit heavier, and it's also higher in relationship to the pivot pin. What that means is the mass is centered above it, so when you go to open this, this is going to be easy to open. So you may have a particular style of knife that you want to carry on a regular basis. What you have to look at are the details of the lock mechanism, details of the blade, look at the mass and everything else, and figure out which type of blade is going to lend itself best. And in some cases, use this type of knife perhaps as training wheels for the knife you really want to carry. So you start to learn the technique with something like this, so that when you're working down to the knife you really want, you can progressively get to the point to where your technique will allow you to get your knife out and open quickly. The bottom line is with an inertial opening, once you get your hands on that knife, it comes out and open very, very quickly. That's what you need when you need your knife most.
Thanks for sticking around to the end, and as promised, we have a gun giveaway, but it's going to end soon. All you need to do is click the link below and reveal what brand new gun you can win. I'm Kevin Michalowski, Director of Content for the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. If you enjoy videos like these, please subscribe to this channel and click that notification bell. We'll notify you every time something new comes out. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.